And our horses are doing pretty well. This Australian season, Kiwi bred and trained horses made up 8% of Group 1 starters, yet won 30% of races. And that's just one statistic to show the quality of New Zealand racing industry at the moment. And along with an exciting future, as you know, racing has a massive heritage in this country. For my family, racing has been part of our way of life for over 3 generations. My mum, for example, she worked the tote at every single race day across Manawatu, Wairarapa and Wellington for over 30 years. For me, it was a trajectory of being an everyday punter to a bookie, to a part owner, to now being minister. And today's announcement is about making sure that we can hand this industry on to the next generation in the best possible shape, to not only keep people in jobs, but to create more jobs and feed more investment into regional communities. So there's 3 recent and significant decisions that Cabinet has made that I would like to talk to you about today. They are: 1, decisions we've made to reinforce and modernise our legislated protection of the TAB from offshore online wagering businesses. The release of the Racing Integrity Board's report into Greyhound racing and the TAB's proposed partnership with Entain. Before I discuss the specifics, I'll just quickly set out the principles that are guiding these decisions. We all want a racing industry that is growing sustainably, that is enjoyed by more Kiwis and is based on the highest possible standards of animal welfare. We know parts of the industry have done it tough in recent years. No community likes to see the loss of a track or a reduction in race meetings. There are racing clubs in New Zealand that have stood for well over a century that are currently facing financial difficulty. We know racing audiences have declined, and the erosion of the existing protection of the TAB, one of the industry's most important revenue sources, by offshore online wagering businesses, means the industry is facing the realistic threat of further cuts to distributions. These distributions are critical to the success or otherwise of racing in New Zealand. If we don't do something, the TAB might be gone in 5 years, and with it goes a $1.6 billion industry. I know past governments have recognised the challenge and opportunities in racing, but tinkering with the status quo will not save jobs, and it will not save the industry. Today's announcement is about making serious and enduring changes so that we can position racing in New Zealand for more success over the next 20 to 40 years. I'm stoked to see so many of you here today, including a broad range of racing people, alongside owners and peak bodies. I'm grateful to owners for the substantial personal investments they make to the success of racing. Without owners, we have no industry, but that is equally true of the grassroots people who are the ones who make it all happen. No industry can survive without its people. The personal sacrifices, the cold early starts, the weekends and the distances you all travel does not go unrecognised. And it is with you in mind that I've progressed the work we are announcing today. So, the first significant decision that I am announcing is that Cabinet has agreed in principle that the existing laws that give TAB monopoly rights over racing and sports wagering in New Zealand have been eroded and should be reinforced. Parliament was clear some decades ago that the TAB should be the sole provider of racing and sports betting in New Zealand. This was done to ensure the New Zealand racing industry, one of the smallest in the world, will continue to be one of the best performing. But at the time those regulations were passed, the explosion of unregulated offshore online competitors was not envisaged. This meant our regulations were not fit for purpose for the internet age, and the TAB was left exposed to challenges that it was too small to face. This offshore competition does not have the obligations to New Zealand that the TAB does, and over time this has placed unsustainable pressure on TAB's ability to support racing and sport in New Zealand. Reinforcing these pre-existing legislative protections will mean more of the revenue from wagering will go back to the racing and sporting codes. And as the heads of the codes will tell you, that revenue stream being sent back into grassroots racing and sport in New Zealand is critical to the future. This revenue has funded development programs that have meant our athletes get the chance to compete on the world stage. This is funding the racing and sporting codes wouldn't get otherwise. Monopoly status is not something given lightly. While it is Parliament's original intent that we are re-establishing, there are always conditions. I am pleased to confirm that because of the financial security afforded to the TAB by this announcement, the TAB have told me they will be able to remove their roughly 500 Class 4 gaming machines from our communities. Given the existing sinking lid policy the government has on these gaming machine licences, this is significant. The government also expects that as a result of this monopoly, the TAB will have a relentless focus on harm minimisation. The Cabinet agreement to restore these legislative protections was in principle. This means there is still detailed policy work and legislative drafting to do before the updated regulations take effect, and I'll engage with the industry on the designs of these regulations so they are as effective as they can be. However, it is important to state that my top priorities are securing the industry for the future, providing high-paying jobs with good conditions, harm minimisation, a world-leading focus on animal welfare, and a fair deal for the punter. Punters won't have anywhere else to go, so they shouldn't be unreasonably restricted just because they beat the bookie. It is also my intention to expand the products TAB can offer odds on, still limited to wagering, so nothing virtual and no casino products, but to include products not currently offered. I intend to ensure the distribution formula that applies to sports will also apply to these products, with the revenue going to harm minimisation. One product that has attracted some concerns over the years is greyhound racing. Concerns have centred on animal welfare and led to 3 reviews in the last decade. All of these reviews made recommendations for change. The most recent report by Sir Bruce Robertson pointed to areas of concern that had to be addressed for the social licence of the industry to continue. On receiving this review, my predecessor, the Honourable Grant Robertson, asked the Racing Integrity Board to monitor the progress of greyhound racing in acting on Sir Bruce's recommendations. I received their report in late December last year with an eye to presenting it to Cabinet in February. However, other events meant that I didn't get the chance. I've now given the report to Cabinet, it's been received, and the RIB report will be released publicly today. We will begin consultation with targeted groups like the industry and animal welfare groups. If we are to close the industry, we need to know how this would work in practice. Where will the dogs go, for example, and who would pay? In trying to address one animal welfare issue, we mustn't inadvertently create another. This is a massive call, and I'm taking it very seriously. The RIB report will be released in roughly half an hour, and after feedback is received, I expect to make a recommendation to Cabinet on whether to close the industry or allow it to continue under tight restrictions. The status quo is not an option. As Minister, I must avoid prejudicing that process and allow people to draw their own conclusions from the RIB report. I know there are strong views within animal welfare groups as well as the industry itself, but as I've said previously, the greyhound industry is on notice and must show improvement if it is to have a social licence in this country. Right, to the final leg of today's multi, the proposed partnership with Entain. The TAB have been working on a 25-year partnership arrangement with the UK-based Entain. To most people, Entain is Ladbrokes. I've said from the outset that partnership arrangements are the TAB's business. The board and chief executive are obligated by the law to maximise their profits to the benefit of racing and sport in New Zealand while minimising the risk of problem gambling. And their obligations include operating the TAB in a financially responsible manner. Acting under these obligations, the TAB have determined that a partnering arrangement with Entain will secure their future. My role as Minister is to ensure such an arrangement takes into account the purposes of the Racing Act and the objectives and functions of the TAB. After looking at it very clearly and carefully, I am satisfied that it does. To give approval to this agreement, I have to be sure that the partnership agreement is a good thing for racing and sport, and I've reached the conclusion that it is because all codes have indicated their support for the agreement. The TAB will receive a $150 million upfront payment, of which sport and harm minimisation will get their share. A 50% share of revenue from day one, with guaranteed payments of at least $150 million for the first 5 years. Retention of the TAB brand. I was determined to prevent this deal being a backdoor entry for an overseas brand to enter the New Zealand market. No TAB job losses in the first 2 years of the agreement. And to avoid any doubt, this significant increase in funding comes from Entain. This agreement does not cost the taxpayer 1 cent. But let's also be clear, Entain are not taking over. If they were, I wouldn't be signing this agreement today. This is a service agreement, and it meets my and the government's bottom lines. To get my agreement, TAB had to assure me that these benefits would not come at the cost of increased gambling harm, and they had to show me how this agreement would increase their harm minimisation efforts. TAB have committed $5 million upon approval of this agreement to go towards gambling harm initiatives. This is likely to include technology and New Zealand specific research. This is additional to the existing contributions TAB NZ make to problem gambling levy. Entain have also committed to investing significantly improving the TAB's harm minimisation efforts. One of the benefits of the agreement will include the ability to bring in Entain's existing harm minimisation technology and structures. These operate at a superior standard to that required by New Zealand law. Partnering with Entain will also give punters a world-class experience. While the operator will not be able to offer products outside of wagering, they will be able to provide a greater range of scenarios and improved odds within those products, reflecting the scale of the international operation. I consider that this agreement and Cabinet's in-principle decision to restore TAB's monopoly make this one of the most significant days in New Zealand's racing history. It will secure the future for the industry. It will mean more money for owners, and it will likely lead to more sponsorship. It will lead to more secure jobs with better pay and conditions. And I believe it will lead to more Kiwi horses being exported around the world. There isn't a major race in the world that a Kiwi horse can't win. And after today, there's every chance that that will happen. So let's get on to signing.
Say something? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Stewart, and I'm the chairman of the TAB. What a great day! What a great day for racing and sport, and thank you very much, Minister, for signing this today. It's been a long exercise to get here, and but it is. I agree with you. It is transformational for racing and for sport, and it is one of the greatest days that we've had for these industries for many years, if not ever. So for that, I'm really grateful, and I'm particularly grateful to the management team at the TAB. Mike Todd was our chief executive, or has been our chief executive, leading this process. Unfortunately, through this exercise, he leaves us once this deal is approved next week, and so that's a bittersweet moment for me as the chairman, looking to the company overall. But nonetheless, he's left a great legacy along with the executive leadership team of the TAB to make this deal happen. So in that sense, good luck to you, Mike, if you're out there. I'm sure you're out there somewhere listening to this. But what a great job he's done, and what a great job the team have done. I don't really want to go into too much further detail other than to thank all of the officials in the government that have been part of this. A big shout out to Claire at DIA, actually. She's really put in a lot of effort to make this happen, and as you can imagine, there's multiple agencies that we have to deal with to get through this. I also would like to congratulate you, Minister, because these things aren't easy, and I'm sure that there's lots of discussions that have gone on with your cabinet colleagues to get us there today. But you know, for me, I'm really proud that you know, my involvement has got some, I guess, movement in this area, and it's a pleasing day for everybody in the industry and for the TAB. Thank you very much. Thanks.
What's the story now? Back on air, is it? Oh, right.
Do you have any specifics on the harm reduction regulation that will entail?
Yeah, well, the second part of this, that's re-establishing the monopoly for the TAB, gives us an opportunity to focus on harm in that respect. So part of that deal, the initial negotiations were that if we were to get an in-principle decision, then finally get it across the line, the TAB would agree to relinquish their Class 4 gaming licences. So that means 500 less pokies in the community, but it also means that we can sit down with both harm minimisation organisations and the TAB to find a way that works. It is a very rare thing to bring in a monopoly, or in this case re-establish a monopoly. That brings huge benefits to the industry, but it also brings responsibility, and that'll be a core focus through that process.
Is there any modelling that you've seen that shows how much offshore gambling platforms are taking from TAB?
I've seen a range of forecasts, but they are up to as much as $600 million being gambled with overseas operators. Now, not all of that what might be with sport and racing, but even if it's half that, that's massive, and that's money that the racing industries and sports are missing out on. Also, those operators don't have the same obligation to the industry. The TAB exists so that the racing industry can exist. That's not their game overseas. So by reinstating the monopoly for the TAB, it's as much about securing the future of the industry and the ongoing revenue streams as it is about anything else.
Is a final decision on Greyhound racing at all possible in this term of government?
Well, let's see how we go, but I think the honest answer is it's most likely to happen after the election. But the process, the next stage of the process starts today. I'll be speaking to the industry to hear their views on the report, and I'll be speaking to the likes of SAFE and SPCA to get their views. Like I said, the status quo isn't really an option. I see there's only two paths here. It's continuing under pretty tight restrictions, or it's closure. And I'm taking it very seriously, but we'll treat the next process with respect. Mm. It's not actually the same with respect. It's the next stage of what the previous minister set out. There was an 18-month process by which the greyhound racing industry had to demonstrate improvements against the report, and we've now received or made public the RIB's report on the progress that they've made. And so if we are to consider closing the greyhound industry, we need to understand what that means and what process that will take. You'll note that I asked the RIB to come back with some recommendations on that. To consider how that works, we need to hear from the industry, and we need to hear from SAFE and SPCA. So it's not the same as what he said. It's carrying on the next stage of the process, one that was signalled quite early, that when we're in a position to be able to release the report, this is exactly what we'd do. Yeah.
So how do you as Minister think that is acceptable after yet another opinion, which is still pointing out issues with injuries and others?
Well, I thought I was pretty clear in the speech that the closure of the industry is a realistic possibility. But if we are going to be in a position to say that it can't continue, we need to get everything lined up. And part of lining that up is talking to those that are going to be impacted. There's a lot of good people in the greyhound industry that take animal welfare incredibly seriously that might be stung by the actions of others. This isn't the sort of thing that you can rush. And so no one should think from the release of the report today that the closure of the industry isn't a realistic possibility. Well, I'll be getting their feedback on the report, but also I'll be getting their feedback on the subsequent report that I asked for as to what the steps would mean if we do decide to close it. And that's why I asked for it. Yeah, that subsequent report wasn't initially asked for. I got the original report and then went back to RIB and said, I'd like your thoughts on what will happen and what the process will be if we decide around the closure of Greyhounds. So this process is still very much continuing as was intended. But that was only one of 3 announcements we made today. The other 2 were around the contribution that racing industry makes to this country, $1.6 billion in exports, up there with fishing and with wine. It's massive, and if we didn't make the changes that we announced today, it was under serious risk of falling over. And as Minister, I wasn't prepared to let that happen. Oh, yep, sure. So that's really a question for the people that negotiated the agreement. So that's a question for TAB. My role as Minister was to approve it. And so I had no say in terms of the negotiations of the agreement. The only decision I was able to make was, am I satisfied this meets the intent and requirements of the law? There were a couple of areas that I was able to indicate that if it was addressed, that they'd increase their chances of me signing it. I expressed concern around job security, particularly in the first 2 years, and was able to achieve that. I wanted to make it incredibly clear that I didn't want this agreement to be a backdoor way from an Aussie or a UK operator to be operating in New Zealand. That's been sorted. And I also wanted to ensure that harm minimisation was a priority and clearly outlined, and that's been addressed as well. And by doing that, I was able to, I can stand here today and say that I'm confident it meets the statutory requirements outlined in the Act. But in terms of specifics of the agreement, that's a question for TAB.
The other thing I'd like to ask is overseas claims.
Well, that's one of the ways in which we might be able to achieve the re-establishing the monopoly for TAB. I mean, the fact of the matter is there aren't many options available to us in which to achieve that. Geo-blocking certainly is one of those options we're going to be looking at, but we also want to make sure that in doing that we achieve our intention, and that is to stop money from New Zealand going overseas to unregulated online providers who then don't contribute back to the New Zealand racing and sports.
The involvement of sport was mentioned in the press release as the increased distributions to sport. Under the current arrangement, sport is a customer of the TAB. Is that arrangement going to change?
No. The increased distributions to sport is on the basis that, as the agreement outlined, there's a $150 million upfront payment and then a guarantee of at least $150 million for the first 5 years. That's significant, and I am confident that this agreement will see ongoing increases in funding to both racing and sports moving forward. What it doesn't touch on is the proportion of distributions from the TAB to sports. That is a matter of negotiation between TAB and the sporting bodies, and that's not something the Minister gets involved in.
Is there a simple pathway for TAB to back out if they fall out of line?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was concerned about and wanted reassurance of was that there were provisions in place to ensure that, for whatever reason, it might be just at the end of the 25-year term, that the TAB would be in a position to pick things up. That's a requirement in the agreement. So I was satisfied by that inclusion there, that the TAB and Entain must make sure that at any point TAB is in a position to be able to pick things up if whatever happens. Yeah, we looked into that, but since those things happened, there's been a significant improvement in their approach. I don't think businesses should be are restricted from being able to enter into service agreements with New Zealand businesses just because they've been fined in the past. It's their current operation at the moment that I'm concerned about, and their harm minimisation structures and their anti-money laundering structures are far superior not only to what the TAB is able to do by themselves, but actually what's required by New Zealand law. And I've had an assurance that they'll be bringing that international best practice over to New Zealand. They won't be dropping their standards just to meet our requirements. So, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me.
Just on that, you might not be a Guardian
Well, it's important to recognise that Entain is the umbrella company that operates with individual companies below it. And so one company getting fined doesn't mean all of them are operating in that manner. It certainly doesn't suggest that the TAB is going to operate in that manner. And in the agreement it makes it very clear that Entain will be required to operate to the same laws and standards that the TAB does themselves. And they also know that if they breach those requirements, then they run the risk of not being able to operate. So as part of this approval, I took it to Cabinet. I didn't need Cabinet approval necessarily, just by the way that the law was written. It was a bit unusual, but it's just down to me. But I still wanted to take it to Cabinet to talk them through it. And in that, we have agreed that we're going to review the current settings to make sure that they are fit for purpose, and we'll be looking at that. But to the guts of your question is, am I concerned about Entain operating in New Zealand? No, because our laws are sound. Their structures are better than our laws require, and the monitoring in New Zealand is robust.
In March, Entain said it was delivered $1 billion to the industry. It's gone down to $900 million. Why is that?
Oh, look, I still think 900 million is significant. It's a hell of a lot more than they get if we stayed as they are. And that is a projection. When you think about the minimum guaranteed payment over that period, I'm actually confident that by securing the TAB's monopoly and re-establishing TAB's monopoly in New Zealand and being able to access the world-class technology and systems that Entain are able to offer the TAB, which the TAB simply can't do by themselves, they're too small, the benefit to New Zealand sports and racing will actually go past that. I'm absolutely certain about that. Is that us? Sweet. All right. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Like they're enjoying that.